Okay, so now we're going to start the immune system, and over the course of the chapter, there'll be multiple videos, so we will need 12 boxes for our notes. And so when we look at our immune system, it deals with our white blood cells. But if you look at our blood cells in general, we have red blood cells and we have white blood cells. And so our white blood cells can actually be divided into two categories. We have our lymphocytes that are part of our third line of defense, which we're going to talk about towards the end of the chapter. And then we have our leukocytes. And our leukocytes are spelled like this, leukocytes. And our leukocytes are what we're going to focus on for our first and second line of defense. Well, not our first, but our second line of defense. So now with our leukocytes, we have different categories of white blood cells. So these lymphocytes we're going to get rid of for right now. So our first one is our neutrophils. And our neutrophils make up 60 to 70% of the white blood cells in your immune system. They're short-lived and they're phagocytic. When we talk about phagocytosis, what we mean is if you have a bacteria, you have like a cell comes and engulfs it. If you remember endocytosis from the cell membrane, that's what neutrophils do. They're phagocytic and they engulf and they clean up infected tissues. Then we have eosinophils, and eosinophils deal with multicellular invaders, so most likely like parasitic worms. So when you look at the how they work, what eosinophils do is they actually release little proteins near the body of the worm. They get real close to it, and those proteins hopefully will put holes into the body of the parasite, causing it to die. Then we have our basophil cells, and our basophil cells are involved in the inflammatory response. But as you can see, they only make up less than 1% of our total white blood cells. So I kind of want to say we're just going to move on for basophil cells. And then you have your monocytes. Now monocytes are probably one of my favorites because they're going to develop into macrophages. So monocytes start out like a simple cell, but as they grow up or as they develop, they turn into macrophages, which are our big eaters. Now, these macrophages are very similar to neutrophils. However, the difference is that these ones are long-lived, and I think they're quite a bit bigger than your regular neutrophils. All right, so those are our different kinds of white blood cells. If you could summarize about those in your box 1. All righty, so now we're going to look at two types of defense. You have your innate defense, which is the defense, immune defenses that you're born with, and you have your acquired immunity, your acquired immune system, which is what you get through life. So if you're, like I had the chickenpox in 5th grade, so I have immunity for the chickenpox that I acquired during my lifetime, and it's very specific for chickenpox. So when I look at the difference here, innate is non-specific. Like your skin is a very important non-specific defense. It does not even care what kind of pathogen is out there. It's trying to keep them all out. And then in the acquired defenses, though, these are more specific. You build an immunity towards pathogens you've experienced in life. So for chickenpox, I'll never have it again because my immune system cells are very specific to know how to fight off chickenpox. But that's the end part of our chapter. All right, so let's look at innate or non-specific defenses. Our first category would be external. So with external, we have our skin, which acts as a barrier. Your skin is your most important first line of defense. And then your skin, kind of cool, has an acidic pH. The oil and sweat glands on your skin actually release chemicals onto your surface to make it slightly acidic, so that way it reduces the likelihood of pathogens surviving on your skin. Then you have mucous membranes. So any opening into your body, like your nose or your mouth, etc., are lined with like a mucous membrane, and these mucous membranes are able to create a sticky mucus that traps pathogens. So if the experience you have with this is if you're sick and you have a stuffy nose, the snot that's being produced is the mucus made by your mucous membranes to trap pathogens. And then you can either like blow it out of your body, so now it's not in you, or you could swallow it, and there you have your stomach acid. So when you swallow your loogie, it has trapped pathogens that hopefully are killed by stomach acid. But you also have stomach acid for any contaminated food or water that you drink. If there's bacteria in like your food, like if it's meat that's not cooked all the way, or food that's a couple days old, for example, you have stomach acid to hopefully kill any pathogens that are there. However, pathogens have also evolved to resist our stomach acid, so sometimes they survive, and that's how you get food poisoning. Okay, and then you have lysozyme. Lysozyme is a pretty cool enzyme that actually digests and breaks apart the cell walls of bacteria. So you find lysozyme in your eyes, in your saliva, not your eyes, in your tears, in your saliva, and also in your mucus secretions. So that's another non-specific way to try to protect you from bacteria and other pathogens. Alrighty, so this is our first line of defense. It's external. And then let's go ahead and write that in our box too. Now let's pretend though you're out skateboarding or something and you fall, and now your first line of defense is cut. So now you actually have pathogens who could possibly get inside of you. So with this, we're going to look at intracellular and chemical defenses. Like, how do you protect you once it's inside, right? So we have our second line of defense. Our second line of defense is also called our inflammatory response. So with our inflammatory response, guys, please remember that this is our second line, because we also have something called the immune response, and that causes confusion for people sometimes. Okay, so here let's look at our skin. So the way our skin works is pretty rad. We have our capillary below our surface. Capillaries are the smallest blood vessels. So now with this capillary, though, that's where our blood flows. So in our blood, we have both red and white blood cells. Alrighty, so in our skin, right below the surface of our skin, we have something called mast cells. And these mast cells are part of our inflammatory response. So let's say your skin gets broken. It gets damaged, it gets cut. Well, those mast cells right below the surface also are damaged. So the mast cells, in response, release chemicals. The chemicals they release are called histamine. Now, histamine's role is to actually communicate. So this histamine would be like a chemical messenger. Think about like when we talked about cell communication. So histamine is going to communicate with the cells lining the capillaries. And then the capillaries, in response to histamine, are going to dilate. Did you see that? Ooh, they dilate. They get bigger. And when that happens, they become more permeable, which means leaky. So now you have your capillaries are a little bit engorged. So if you think about a cut that you've had on your skin at some point in your life, it probably got a little red around the edges. And when it's red around the edges, that's because the blood vessels have engorged, bringing more blood to the area. So when we look at this, it also causes swelling. Think about a cut that you've had that was kind of deep or severe. Most likely around the edges of the scab, it was raised. So you have like swelling coming to that area. So some symptoms of the inflammatory response would be heat, swelling, redness, are all signs that you have a local inflammation. You have some kind of pathogen living in the surface and your body is currently working to fight it off. So so histamine, what does histamine do? Alrighty. Now, when the capillaries engorge and they swell and expand, they also release their own chemical called a chemokine, which I believe is on the next slide. But anyway, so in response to the histamine, the capillaries swell, and then you have the chemokines are released. But I think your next box is dealing with the signs of local inflammation. So, what are the symptoms and signs of an inflammatory response, and why? Awesome. Box 3. Okay, so now we have the histamine was released, caused the capillaries to expand. You have the chemokines have been released. Now, I also want to point out, what wasn't pictured before, is that on the surface of your skin, there's bacteria or pathogens. On whatever broke your skin, there's also bacteria or pathogens. Unless something is officially labeled as sterile, there's going to be bacteria or pathogens on every surface. So now that our skin is broken, that actually allows bacteria to enter into the body or into the tissues. But first, let's look right here. So here we have chemokines finally defined for you. Now, chemokines, let's check this out. They're going to attract phagocytic cells. So when our mast cells were damaged and our mast cells released histamine, that told the capillaries to expand and release chemokines. Why? Well, because they are going to attract white blood cells, the neutrophils that we talked about earlier. So let me erase some of the writing on here. So let's look at the big picture here. Your skin was broken, which pretty much implies that bacteria entered into your body. Some kind of pathogen, foreign invader, is in your tissues. So we want to get these things gone. And so how do we do this? Well, first we need to bring them in the blood. So the histamine that was released by the damaged cells causes the blood vessels to expand and to dilate, which brings more white blood cells to the area. But then how do the white blood cells know where to go? Well, then those swollen or engorged capillaries release chemokines. And these chemokines now are going to tell the white blood cells, the neutrophils or the phagocytes, where to go. And they actually will leave the blood and go up into the infected tissues. And so the phagocytes are going to engulf and take in those bacteria. You also have little platelets, like blood clotting factors, that will come and start to close up the wound. And so it prevents further infection. It tries to stop future bacteria from entering. So then we have, once that skin heals by mitosis, and the swelling goes down, the capillaries go back to their regular shape, the inflammatory response is now over, and you've healed. And so when we look at this, this is a body's non-specific way to protect you against pathogens. It didn't care the species of bacteria or the debris or dirt or viruses or fungus or anything that got into your tissues. It just tried to engulf and clean up that area. So your next box is to discuss with the person next to you the relationship between chemokines and phagocytes. And then summarize in your box 4. Ooh, now let's look at phagocytosis in more detail. So here we have our bacteria or pathogen being engulfed by a white blood cell. It could either be a neutrophil or a macrophage, and it engulfs this microbe and then brings it in. Now the cool thing here is we have something called lysosomes. Lysosomes are organelles that have a low pH. And so the lysosomes will actually fuse with that vacuole that has the microbe and then release their lower pH, and I think they have chemicals in there as well that are going to destroy that pathogen, destroy that microbe, and then the remains can be sent out by exocytosis. So when we look at this, the microbes are destroyed in 2 ways. Oh yeah, that's right. It's nitric oxide. So nitric oxide can poison the microbes, and then the lysozyme and other degrading enzymes digest the microbes. So when that lysosome organelle, so right here, when that lysosome organelle attaches fuses with that vacuole, what's going to happen is it's going to send into this space right here nitric oxide as well as enzymes that degrade. So that pathogen is killed, and then the remains can be sent out. So you have nitric oxide that's in the lysosome can poison the microbes, and then that enzyme we saw in the first line of defense, lysozyme, that can like break down cell walls, will try to degrade that microbe as well. So that's what happens when a white blood cell engulfs and takes it in. It kills the bacteria or the microbe in both of these ways. All right, so if you could go ahead and explain that in your box number 5. Okay.